boxer, bodyguard, union steward, coal miner, and defender of the defenseless, who was far and away the toughest true activist I ever knew, and whose ancestral code I have done my utmost to uphold. I want to read the front of peace poem. I used to use this with my kids at Finney a lot. A couple of them memorized it, but I didn't make them memorize this one because it's several lines. Mama, please tell us why we had to die. I see Sam Riddle in the audience too. You know, my eyesight isn't that good, but I think I see him. Mama, please tell us why we had to die. Children, that's easy. I can tell you why. You died so the junkies can smoke their crack. The dope house dealers can make their cash. The politicians can sell their votes. And the pimps can preen in their long fur coats. And the crooked cops can collect their pay. And the corporate cats can run away. And the school officials can promote their friends, while the kids don't get any books or pens. And the drive-by shooters can perfect their aim, as the filthiest rappers get in halls of fame. And the teenage truants can watch TV. We have about 20,000 of them right now that aren't even in school. You know, Helen knows that. And the teenage truants can watch TV or lie in the bed, catch HIV. And the high school dropouts can act the fool. And your sisters can be scared to walk to school. And so the Lord can grant your mama the indomitable soul to somehow stanch this tragic trauma like a bleeding bullet hole. Now, I can't go through, obviously, this whole long book, but I want to read you some of the chapter titles, just so that they will maybe intrigue you into maybe wanting to come up here and get a book. The prologue is In Pursuit of a Dream Deferred, and we all know where that phrase came from. Chapter 1 is 16th Street. That's where I grew up. I grew up on 16th Street in Grove. Chapter 2 is of fighting and fiddling and rap. Now, I got my fiddle here, and I was fighting a lot, and rap is my dog. You know, I had a dog in rap. Because, you know, I was starting out when I was a little kid here in this book. It's my life story. Chapter 3 is An Unscout-like Scout Troop. Semicolon, a girl with a glass eye. I actually got in a fight with that girl, because she picked the fight with me, beat the crap out of me. You know, she was a little bit bigger and older. Mm-hmm. Chapter 4 is Boxing Boy Scouts and Bye-Bye to Boyhood. Chapter 5 is Some Wonderful Coaches, A Teen Transformed. Chapter 6 is Wayne State Gets a World-Ranked Runner. Chapter 7 is The Fast Tracks of Europe, a world record. Chapter 8 is Pimps, Nymphs, and a Prince of Sprints. And the title there. Chapter 9 is Educational Sex and a, quote, vaginal text. Chapter 10 is Why You Didn't Tell Me That. That was a paper that I wrote, and I used Ebonics as the title. I wrote that paper in 1962. It ended up being used as a treatise at some of the East Side high schools. Chapter 11, A Brief Comeback, A Final Race, and Exile. Chapter 12, Brotherhood of Bureaucrats and Bulletin Boards. I'm going to skip a little bit. Chapter 14, Big Ballhead Jones and Mr. Northrup's Nose. Chapter 16, The Original Mr. Peanut and a Girl Called Viet Cong. Chapter 15 was a peeing contest and liberating the library. Chapter 17 was Firebombs and Teacher Blood. All those were at Hutzel. You know, Hutzel Junior High School, and I was administrator of that back in the 60s. Interesting times. Cerebral Johnny Thomas and Some Jolting Journals is chapter 19. Lost touch with Johnny Thomas. He was I would love to find him again. Chapter 21 is a messianic messenger called Cockrell, the first Cockrell. Chapter 23 is Some Final Journals and a Journey. Chapter 24 is Fights at Dances and a Person Piss. I did not know whether I should say a person pee or a person piss. You know, piss is kind of a blunt word, you know, but I did not change that, and my editor was okay with it. Chapter 27, well, okay, I'm not going to go through this whole thing. Let's see, there are a lot of chapters here, you guys, I'm not going to read them all. The famous and infamous Telford's Telescope, that was the first time I wrote a Telford's Telescope. That was a treatise that I wrote out in Rochester, you know, about really integrating the schools. and there were some community residents who weren't happy with that prospect. Chapter 36, bigots behind every bush. Every bush, no pun intended. Chapter 39, the Gulf and the Governor, Warren Wampum Woes. That was England, on this cut in education. People forget something. This is the first time we've been in this mode. Chapter 44, a rights agency decimated. Oh, let's see, okay, we're going to skip through some of this. Team for Justice beckons, then back with Burnley. And you know, Burnley was my guy, and I was his guy. There was an editor in the Citizen that wanted me to do a hatchet job on him. And I was writing a lot of really left-wing stuff. But I told him, this is not something that I'm prepared to do. You know, Ken wasn't as bad a superintendent as a lot of people say he was, and he wasn't as good a superintendent, unfortunately, as he thought he was. And he delegated to the wrong people, and some bad things happened. You know, actually that was the beginning of a tailspin that our district went into, the really fast tailspin, because it's been tailspinning for a couple of decades. Chapter 57, a principal's jaw broken by gangbangers. The principal whose jaw was broken was sitting right over there right now. He's still there, Al Ward. You can probably tell I can't see, really. Pertinent, penitent poetry, the kid killed in school. That's chapter 59. Chapter 61 was Dr. John Telford's last All-American Army. Chapter 62 is finally a superintendency. That lasted about 2 minutes. Chapter 63, ethnocentric echoes from the past. Chapter 64, an account tally of reckoning rendered. And an epilogue, which is kind of like a chapter, but it's a dream to fulfill at the time to pass. Okay, believe it or not, I'm only at the introduction now, after all this talking. And I can remember telling my editor, are you sure you want to put all these in the front of the book? And maybe I want to go to the back of the book. You know, we don't get to chapter 1 until page 88. You know? No, he said, this is the way it has to be done. So that's the way we did it. Introduction. And I'm not forgetting Alfred. Alfred's going to be doing some reading. John Powell, Professor John Powell, is the executive director of the Kirwan Institute for the Study of Race and Ethnicity at The Ohio State University, and far and away the most brilliant student at junior high, high school, any level, you know, graduate school, any level I've ever taught. John Powell, you know, he had them all beat, the best of them. He writes, and he was also the National Legal Director of the ACLU when I got in trouble in Rochester. And he called the Rochester Board President and said, touch a hair of his head, and I'm going to put the entire apparatus of the National ACU at Telford's disposal. And they backed down. Of course, there was a group of black parents that felt the same too. And that was a school district that had maybe 11,000, 12,000 kids, only maybe 200, 250 black kids. And every one of those parents showed up at a board meeting. They tried to find 500 of them at a board meeting, couldn't even find seats for them. And then a white group of liberals joined them. And they turned out to be stronger than the bigots. You know, there have been a couple hundred bigots there trying to get me fired, you know, at the previous month. John wrote, A Life on the Run is a triumphant tale of teaching, fighting, loving, racing, civil, righteous rebellion, and raw courage. Once you start reading this spellbinding book, you won't stop. Dr. John Telford lays it on the line, an exciting activist educator, style like the exciting activist educator he is. Inspirationally sprinkled here and there throughout these pages are his clear and masterful solutions to the myriad social problems America faces in the 21st century in and out of academia. And you know, I've been writing a lot of those solutions in my Chronicle column, but nobody who's in power seems to be listening. You know, I've been doing this for a long time. I did it on my radio show, you know, before I lost my sponsors, because they ran out of money. You know, thanks to George W. Bush. Nobody recognizes the trickle down there. Powell continues, his panoramic 70-year saga, actually I'm 74, 70-year saga, from his gritty Detroit boyhood to his days as a champion sprinter and his years as a caring teacher and maverick administrator, presents a captivating, historic perspective of the civil rights movement in urban and suburban schools and his key role in that movement. In the book's title, Run is actually a mere metaphor. The book is less about John Telford's running or about his romances, which I try to tell my wife, than it is about his having burst out of the starting blocks nearly 3/4 of a century ago to begin his long run seeking and safeguarding social justice. Here follows his truly amazing story. I want to share some of the prologue because it has bearing, lots of bearing for some of the things that I'm going to be, I may not have the time to share with you in this book, but I think all of us who care about kids need to read. I always put a little saying in front of each chapter, in front of the prologue and the epilogue. The little saying here is a quote from myself. We must undermine the mind molesters and if necessary dismember them as well. Wayne Dyer and I were writing a book called The Mind Molesters when he got really busy. So that book, is just half finished and it's still sitting in both of our files. I don't know if we'll ever finish it, but this has a lot of the stuff in there that we were going to write together. Your venerable old author wrote the earliest version of this book's frontispiece poem, Mama, Please Tell Us Why We Had to Die, in 1986, when I was the assistant superintendent of schools in the far northern Detroit suburb of Rochester, Michigan. 1986 was a watershed year for children's deaths by gunfire in Detroit. It's been a long time coming. It's not anything new. Where I was born in the mid-1930s at the height of the Great Depression, raised in the 1930s and 1940s, and publicly educated and exceedingly well educated, I might add, in the 1940s and 1950s. It was during the 1930s and 1940s, specifically between 1936 and 1949, that National City Lines, a holding company sponsored and funded by General Motors, Firestone, and Standard Oil, successfully conspired to buy out more than 100 electric surface transit systems in Detroit and 44 other cities. It'd be really nice if we had that now, wouldn't it? The company replaced them with GM buses, incidentally helping to set the stage for George W. Bush's ruinous Iraq War half a century later and an escalating oil crisis and plummeting stock market crash that has pushed much of the nation, including the 90% of inner city families in Detroit and throughout the country who are already in dire financial trouble, over the precipice of insolvency and precipitated the government's bailout of Wall Street. Ironically, as I write this in 2009, is when I wrote this, that series of events that began so long ago, we also have, God forbid, spelled the impending decline of modern-day General Motors and the entire American automobile industry. That hasn't happened yet, thank God. Our once formidable arsenal of democracy. How, you ask, could a criminal corporate conspiracy of so many faded decades ago possibly have helped to generate these calamities and cause today's children in Detroit and other inner cities to die by gunfire and their bodies and minds to be molested by disintegrating families and failing schools? To discover and understand the specific answers to that question, as well as the answers to other similar questions involving similarly nefarious corporate, governmental, academic, political, and social scenarios I'm going to give you in this book. You will need to connect the dots as you digest this entire book. I dedicated Mama to the 46 Detroit youngsters who died in 1986 and to the many others whose minds are being molested and whose spirits are dying every year and every day in and out of Detroit's public schools, as well as in almost every urban school in the United States of America. This malodorous molestation of untold thousands of black children's minds, bodies, and lives, and those of brown children, too, is still being perpetrated throughout our homegrown urban ghetto bordered by Alter Road, 8 Mile Road, Telegraph Road, and that wide strait known as the Detroit River, whose swift current separates the Canadian city of Windsor from its far less clean and far more violent American sister city. The same malevolent molestation is being perpetrated in other ghettos across the land, as well as outside the confines of those ghettos, pervasive circumstances that I will also address in this book. I first published Mama in my weekly Telford's Telescope column, the Detroit-based African-American-owned Michigan front page newspaper, on May the 10th, 2002, as a topical lead-in about the then recent shooting deaths of yet 4 more Detroit children: Jarrell Thomas, Breonna Cadell, Adjani Pollard, and Destiny Thomas. Oftentimes, we can express turbulent and bitterly ironic emotions like this in poetry that are far harder to articulate in prose. That is what some Detroit high school students did for a poetry contest in 2002 on the topic of peace that was sponsored by SOSAD, Save Our Sons and Daughters, for which I served as a judge. The top 3 poets were adjudged to be Sansa Senyika of the Detroit High School of Fine and Performing Arts, Cameron Gaylor of Cody High School, and James Moody of Finney High School. Sansa wrote, "Trapped in a storm of madness, my people hunger for peace." Cameron asked, "Why am I here? The stench of death in the air." In another poem he observed, "Police storm our blocks, pulling Glocks." James defined peace as love in a relation, city, state, or nation. Peace, he added, is just another word for reconciliation. Other worthy contestants wrote, "We come from houses with no fathers, left to believe the streets are right, schoolboy by day, menace by night, Aaron Peoples in behind. Why is there blood on our feet instead of peace in the street?" Raquel Bynum. "Teens today are a disaster. There's never love or any laughter. And why can't there be a day without killing on the news, or people getting AIDS, or kids with bad grades?" Monique Clay. "I don't know what's going wrong, all these rappers with bad songs." Charlotte Perry. 30% of our males end up in the jails. Daniela Howard. "The streets are just so bad, you can't go out and play. Before you even know it, someone shot at him today." Shakira Charlie and Cody. "No peace on the street is really scary because you don't know who you're going to bury." Valencia Washington. "You know, these kids are poets and they're good. And they're not, anybody in any special program. They say our kids can't learn. Our kids can learn. If we believe they can learn. We haven't taught them to read, many of them. When Al and I were getting these kids at Finney, coming into the 9th grade, they're reading, 3.5 grade, 4.5 grade. Those class sizes have to be reduced in grade 1. Those kids got to be taught to read. Remember one time, when I was deputy superintendent in Rochester, they invited me to Chicago, suburb, to speak about language arts and linguistic education. And I went there, I flew there, they flew me, and I was sitting and looking at my watch, because a whole bunch of folks got up and made self-congratulatory speeches. You know how that goes. You've got all the high mucky-muck sitting in there, they've all got to have their 2 minutes of fame. And it was getting so late that I just kind of scrapped my notes. I think I really wanted to go home. And I just got up and said, "Teach them to read." Sat back down. Everybody got to go home. 31 years before I wrote the initial shorter version of Mama, I was a 19-year-old sophomore at Wayne State University running on a renowned relay team, often anchored either by me or by a superb sprinter named Cliff Hatcher, who later became my best friend of 52 years. He died in 2006. Some of you may remember Cliff Hatcher. He was an All-American quarter miler at Central High School, ran a 48.8 quarter mile, 1951 on dirt. We were all running on dirt. We were running on these composition tracks. I was running 46-second quarter mile on dirt. You know, that's still a record now. Somebody, when they get the track program back, somebody will break it probably fairly fast because they won't be running on dirt. Although, I don't know, it's kind of a hard one to break. It was the summer of 1955, the year after Brown versus Board of Education had declared separate but equal to be inherently unequal, and the Mississippi murder of a black teenager from Chicago who was 5 years younger than me. He was a teen, I was a teen. He was 14 years old, I was 19 years old. Moved me to write this poem. I wrote this poem a long time ago, 1955. I was 19, I'm 74 now, but I wrote it. And it made its public debut in a little local periodical called Nexus. Beneath a hill, in blackest chill, with peristaltic steady drill, blind crawl things crawl and feed and fill on what is all of Emmett Till. Above the mound, the thunder-sounding voices cry, he didn't die. Though thunder cries may sunder skies, no thunder sounds heard underground, no lightning leaps where Emmett sleeps. You know, 20 years later, I would add another stanza. Deep thunderbolts must rend the skies before the movement can revive. Then lightning bolts will bend the skies as Emmett rises, re-alive. In perusing all of the preceding pain-filled poems, or snatches of poems, and pondering their poignant yet sometimes hopeful themes, kids always have hope. Sometimes they have more hope than we do. We can conclude